Hey everyone, I just finished the new book Ownership by Sean McGever, published by InterVarsity Press. Thanks IVP for sending me this copy for review. This is my honest reaction to this book. Let me take you through the typical format that I use, which is the main idea of the book, the research behind that idea, the readability of its style, and then my general reactions to it as a whole. The subtitle of this is The Evangelical Legacy of Slavery in Edwards, Wesley, and Whitfield. So the main idea here is this is a deep historical exploration of how, in particular, these three kind of titans in American evangelical Christianity, George Whitfield, Jonathan Edwards, and then John Wesley, how did these three figures understand the issue of slavery in their time? How did they comment on it? How did they participate in it in some cases? And then what's the legacy of them kind of moving on today? What's the legacy they left behind as they interacted with this institution that we abhor as just this terrible evil today? That's what it's about. It's about those three figures in particular, how they understood and related with slavery in their time, and then the legacy that they left behind. That's what ownership is about. So that's really quickly how I can summarize the main idea. The research behind it is extremely impressive. This is probably one of the highest kind of elements, marks of this book for me, is the historical research is no joke. This is one of those books, kind of rare books that's like, you saw it when I held it up. It's not very long. I'll say more about the readability in a second. It's not very long, but like it's kind of, the academic heft to the research behind it is like belied by the length and approachability of it, actually. It seems like this jaunty little popular level book, but it's got this like massive muscular academic scholarship behind it. I mean, it sounds like he did his PhD work in this area, or something related to it at least. And so he's read a ton of the primary sources, the primary writings of these three figures, Wesley, Whitfield, and Edwards. He's read a lot of the primary like sources of the time, commenting on them, things like their letters, their sermons, their writings. He's read a lot of secondary stuff, biographies. I mean, just read a lot, and he brings that all to bear here. The research is extremely impressive. I was really shocked in a good way by how much is behind this work. And so the readability of it, it's very short. That's one thing. I got through this quickly, mostly because of the length. The chapters are not long. The style is, I would say, it's academic but readable. It's not this like. It's not like a popular level conversational blog. It's nothing like that. It's not, devotional, if you know what that kind of genre is. It is more academic, just by virtue of what the kind of important and nuanced case he's trying to make. But it is understandable. It is not inscrutable by any means. I would say anyone with a more than passing interest in this subject would not be, even if you're not a big reader, you would not be put off by the difficulty getting through this book at all. I think that's a lot of it's due to the length and kind of it's short, so it's economically written. And another thing I want to say about the readability of it is, before I get to my reaction, he's really, I don't know if I want to say pastoral or prophetic. I don't know what the right descriptor is here, but he includes a lot of introspection here. So there's a lot of reflection built into the writing, so as to say, like, if this person, this theological giant, missed what was so clearly wrong and immoral about this thing that was happening around them they were participating in at their time, someone like Whitfield, if they missed it, what might you be missing as a reader right now happening in your time? There's a lot of stuff like that. So there's a lot of things that prompt reflection and introspection in a very fair way that just, it actually enhanced the readability. I think this is not just a dry, abstract, disconnected historical text. And so that leads me into my reaction. So my whole reaction to this book, I want to caveat my whole reaction with this, which is to say this is a very finely tuned and specific historical interest. So if you are not interested or actively uninterested in what this book is trying to do, I don't think anything I'm going to say is maybe not going to apply to you. That's my caveat. This is a very, very specific and finely tuned historical kind of work. That said, I loved and adored this book. I loved it. I loved it for the academic heft that I talked about already. I loved it for that introspective element I just talked about. But also, I just thought that he does an amazing job with a few things. He does an amazing job with a few things, better than anything I've read yet. I haven't read Marsden's biography of Jonathan Edwards, which is something I've been meaning to get to, and he talks about, he references that biography here, and I've heard that he does a good job of nuancing Jonathan Edwards' approach to slavery in that biography and race and all that stuff. Anyways, that's a tangent. Nothing else that I've read yet has done what this book does in such a short page count, which is stridently and morally critique the evils of slavery and the blindness, especially someone like George Whitfield at the time. Like that critique is here. However, he also situates those men in particular, these three men, he situates them very clearly in their cultural context and explains so helpfully how theologians understood the issue of slavery, of an institutionalized slavery at the time. One example is that no one else has done so successfully as drawn out this nuance, at least for me. He talks about how, yes, everyone talked about the kind of inevitability of slavery and just the ubiquity of slavery, that it was just this thing that existed, that the idea of it not existing was kind of just completely off the collective radar, at least for these guys, these men. But he nuances that understanding a little bit as to say, like, yes, they believed in kind of the inevitability of slavery, but they believed that it was inevitable because humans are sinful. So kind of this idea that, yes, humans would continue to practice owning other humans because humans were sinful. So it was inevitable, but it wasn't necessarily like a good thing. And that distinction is something that gets lost in a lot of popular clapbacks to historical figures who participated in slavery. And I think he does this remarkable job at critiquing their moral blindness from our vantage point, but also articulating fairly how they understood the systems that they were participants in, which then primes the reflective piece to be like, okay, are there any institutions and systems we participate in now that we think, yeah, that's just kind of how the world is, maybe because humans are sinful, at least that's what Christians would say. Is there something that we're doing right now that, 200, 250 years, 400 years, people are going to be like, how could these blind people not have seen the immorality of what they're doing? He threads that through so remarkably well, better than kind of anything I've ever read on this subject in particular. There's a great little chapter on the Quakers being a voice of kind of agitation that sparked a lot of the what would become the abolition movement. He does, I think, a really, really even-handed case for how Wesley turned to become an abolition voice. He has a really good account for kind of Jonathan Edwards' failings on this subject, but also how there was something about Edwards' legacy that, like, the generation immediately after Edwards that followed his teachings actually became abolitionists, so there's something there. And he's probably the hardest on Whitfield, understandably, but even Whitfield's project of his orphanage and his reliance on slavery, and even advocating for the introduction of slavery to the colony of Georgia, which is just a horrendous thing to think about. Even that, as hard as he is on that, he even still describes it historically fairly and endeavors to describe how someone like Whitfield could have thought logically towards that end. And so the result is just a profoundly helpful historical study. It's a profoundly helpful and insightful historical study that I think anyone with an interest specifically in there's a lot of, I think, appropriate kind of angst around how do we approach someone like an Edwards, who is just a giant in terms of theology, philosophy, religion in American history. How do we approach someone like that with this massive moral stain of participating in slavery? How do we approach someone like that? Well, this book is it'd be the best kind of entryway for thinking historically carefully and morally responsibly and introspectively on that subject. It is so good, and it's packaged in such an economical, short publication that I just think this should be... I want it to be widely read by people who are kind of posturing and debating and pandering or not pandering, whatever. People are just engaging in this very active debate right now, particularly within Christianity, around race and institutional slavery and the legacy of these thinkers. Like, I just think this book is perfect for this debate, and I really want more people to read it. If you're interested in that, that's my caveat. If you're interested in that and you're interested in doing some historical legwork to get there, just stop and read this book. If you're not interested, I don't know. Yeah, your mileage is going to vary depending on what you want to get into, because it's a very, very, very specific and finely tuned project. But for what it is, man, it is absolutely excellent. So high recommendation for me on Ownership by Sean McGever and IVP. Thank you, as always, for taking some time to watch.